average reported price is somewhere in around 760 at the minute. If I look at Australia, theirs is 490 and New Zealand is 440 a kilo. Now we've probably been lucky in a way that the US market has been so strong for these markets. China, while given a lower price, continues to take good volumes of lamb off the world market. So they've sort of had markets closer to home, and the price differential has narrowed. Even at that, it was nearly as wide as 350 a kilo at some stages last year. It's just all sort of keeping that balance. We want to have access to the EU markets and want to keep them out as much as possible.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're joined in this week's episode by Board BA Sheep Sector Manager Seamus McMenamin to give us an update on the market conditions. We discussed the current trade and what's driving prices, the trend in numbers this year and how that might impact the trade for the coming months. We also discussed the impact of bluetongue and southern hemisphere imports on the trade in the European market. We hear first from Seamus.
You're talking the base coats at the minute are in around 750, 760 and add your quality assurance to that. But realistically, like anyone with bargaining power and the right sort of lambs, there's prices of up to €8 available around. So we're well ahead of where the trade was even in the last couple of years. So it's been a very positive year from a price perspective for Irish farmers.
It's certainly been a good back end for more than one reason, and the price at the moment is helping that. I suppose, Jamie, if we're trying to understand what has pushed us to that price point at this time of the year.
Yeah, I suppose there's a number of things that sort of fed into it. But first of all, you had that decline in the ewe flock last December, so that automatically had an impact on the number of lambs produced. And then we had sort of very mixed weather conditions for lambing this year. Like even some of the Teagasc reports were given, high levels of mortality on farms. So particularly, maybe in the east of the country, where, the ewes lamb a wee bit earlier, there was talk anyway of very high mortality. So that has really impacted into, the really tighter supply of lambs. And if you look at the kill, we're probably back by about 110, 120,000 head of this year's lambs or less. And then I suppose then just to add into that, then the very strong trade in the UK has redirected some of those Northern Irish lambs that traditionally would have been coming here are going across to the mainland GB instead, where they qualify for the red tractor because of their British tags. So it is really, it's kind of created the perfect storm in terms of us having reduced domestic supply and then less imports as well. So that's all fed into quite a strong reduction in the kill.
It is supply driven, and we've all seen what happened this spring, and I think the reality is there has been a lot less lambs on farm. Yeah. Can you just talk maybe a wee bit about that, numbers? We've seen our flock decline slightly. There's been reports from across the water this week in the UK as well that their flock has declined. That's likely to have an ongoing impact on the lamb trade. We've
seen it, even if you roll back to the spring 2024, there was a big increase in the hogget kill, way more than what we expected, and what was driving that was a very high price, and lads were killing any sort of ewe lamb that wasn't suitable or what they perceived was unsuitable for breeding. And then as you rolled into the autumn, then we've seen very tight hogget supplies and good trade for the better quality ones anyway, good demand. But I suppose we've seen 2 years of a contraction in the ewe numbers, and then I'd say that coming up to this December, we have seen a bit of a contraction in the ewe kill, so we're probably looking at some stability in the sheep kill, but it'll take a wee while for that to recover again, because we're short of lambs, lads, even with the strong prices there at the minute, they're really considering, just killing lambs and not holding on to them. So I'd say the census will come out at Christmas time probably stable at best, I would suspect. But as you touched on there, the declining ewe numbers, they're not just happening in Ireland, they're happening in the UK and across all those mainland Europe flocks as well. All of them have shown a decline. A combination of things, profitability, aging farmers, but disease is having an impact as well. The impact of bluetongue, particularly in mainland Europe, is having a big impact on sheep numbers.
We can't underestimate that. Maybe somehow just talk about that international trade for a minute. In Europe, how big of an impact is that having, Seamus?
Yeah, but I suppose if you look at the initial sheep forecast that they gave back earlier in the year, now they haven't given us out an updated one yet, but they were talking about a 7% decline in the second half of the year in terms of production. But I suppose reports of what we're hearing across in Eastern Europe in particular is that bluetongue has had a big impact on lamb supplies. And then if you look then maybe closer to home than France and Spain, definitely having an impact there in numbers, maybe not as severe as Eastern Europe, but it will have a longer term impact in terms of their productivity. Like in cases even in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands are a very small producer of sheep meat, but what they're forecasting that some of those blue tongue strains are at a 50% death rate among the ewe flock. So it's definitely something that needs to be monitored and kept an eye on.
It's going to be challenging for supply next spring for them. Come back just home again, like you touched on. I think we look at your figures. Our yoke kill is probably down marginally, maybe on where it was this time last year, percentage wise.
Yeah, no, it has come back a bit now. I know some yokes are leaving and been killed maybe across in GB, but overall it's looking like there's slightly less yokes been killed, and I know we're pulling that off a smaller yoke flock as well, I suppose. But I suppose one thing we have seen is an improvement in the live trade. They're definitely more active around the rings, and the latest figures in the department do show a stronger demand of the live trade. What's leaving the country on the hoof, and I suppose that is coming off those tighter supplies in the UK or in GB anyway, and in mainland Europe as well.
Going for the feeding there. Look, when we're talking about the live trade, there's been a fairly strong live export trade even in recent weeks on lambs as well.
Yeah.
Even some lighter lambs going. That's going to have a bit of a knock-on impact next spring as well.
Yeah, no, and that's it. Like, so what the initial forecasts were looking at maybe a 4 or 5% decline in our lamb flock. Now I haven't really run the figures, but it could, when you're factoring in a stronger live export trade, we're definitely looking at quite tight supplies for processing next spring. And then you have to consider then as well the number of hoggets coming down from Northern Ireland as well. If they continue to move across to GB, it'll feed into a very tight supply situation. Now, overall, Europe, the whole of Europe's probably looking at the same picture of a real contraction in supplies as well. So we're going to run into a situation where prices are probably going to be quite firm and quite strong. But you just need to be careful. You don't want the prices getting too strong because the market becomes very attractive then to the southern hemisphere.
There is probably that upper point on it, as you touched on there. Like, look, we're higher than we are normally this time of year. Prospects for spring would be definitely increased, but I suppose it has an upper limit too.
Yeah, no, and it is like the consumers. I know food inflation has maybe slowed down to some extent across Europe, but there's still very, very high cost of living. Food inflation is cumulative. So, like lamb is still very expensive compared to the other proteins now. The very strong recovery in the beef trade at the minute might actually also work to our advantage, but compared to maybe some of the poultry and the pork prices for the house buyer going into the supermarket, lamb is still very expensive, and that does have an impact. So I think the EU short-term forecast is looking like a 2% decline in like consumption of lamb in the EU for the next 6 months. I think is what they're predicting. Some of that's off the back of tighter supplies, but also that higher price point is a barrier to certain cohorts of the population.
But overall, if we took the whole context of where numbers are at, it's still a very positive looking spring ahead.
Yeah, no, certainly it is. It's very positive, and with tighter supplies everywhere, and you do have that cohort of population that buy lamb and will continue to buy lamb, and that'll sort of help keep a flow on the trade. But the lamb trade is very much supply and demand driven, and there is I would say steady demand for it and tight supplies. Is sort of what's driving that good trade at the minute.
Look, when we're talking about the trade, numbers is one thing, probably carcass or producing is another. Look, we might have had some issues earlier on in the year with late lambs going in, maybe not suitable for the market that we're going for. What has that looked like this year? Has the price in recent weeks seen an increase in carcass, or are there still issues in the abattoirs?
Yeah, I suppose if you roll back to maybe June or July, I suppose prices were relatively strong, and then they sort of fell very rapidly within a couple of weeks. And I suppose buyers kind of panicked a bit and they killed lambs maybe at lighter carcass weights, and there was maybe some issues in some of the factories about the lambs not being well enough covered. But I suppose as the year has gone on and people have seen that stability in the trade, they've been happy enough to keep the lambs until they're fit, and the factories will be encouraged and take the full value out of the lamb, push them on and get them to the full weight. So the average carcass weight last week was up to 22 kilos. And the reports of the factories will be that generally the lambs being presented are of very good quality. Now, one difference in the lamb trade this year is that given that there's very tight supplies and the strong prices, has basically made the carcass trade for lamb much more attractive, and maybe and a much better option maybe for the processors as well. So upwards to maybe 50% of the lambs are currently leaving here in carcass form, and that is actually a hard. That's probably a stricter market in terms of those carcass weights. Like they want those lambs like peas in a pod, really. Like so, 20 to 22 kilos is kind of their sweet spot, what they're looking for. So it's good that more of the lambs are coming in that wee bit heavier, because they're being used then to fill the retail. The retail trade on the continent, the carcass trade, and then also the domestic. So the bigger amount of the kill that could be within that desired weight range definitely leaves it easier to sort of get full value out of the business.
And that has reversed the trend we've seen for the last couple of years. I think last year was something in the order of half a kilo down on the previous one. We've seen it decline over the last couple of years, so that has kind of stemmed and brought back to more normal, where we should see carcass weights come in.
Exactly, we've sort of seen that sort of reverse the trend now. No, we've probably had that very late flush of grass too that has helped. The grazing season has been pushed on. Like there's still grass growing. Maybe not this week with the snow coming, but like the grass growing season has pushed on, and that's helped a lot of men put that bit of extra flesh on them, and come in those heavier weights towards this latter end of the year.
It will certainly help to take a bit of pressure off with drafting. Seamus, if we just circle back to where we were, I suppose there's also a tipping point there for most producers. Like if we can keep our ewe flock stable, it's a numbers game at the end of the day in terms of profit too for the farmer and for the overall industry. We still need to have a good quota of sheep there to work with to fill those markets. It's all right talking about getting into them, but it's keeping supply to them as well is important.
Yeah, no, and that's it. Like you need enough sheep just to maintain all of the processors that are there and keep throughput and keep customers. But the key thing is with customers that we're obviously exporting 85% of everything that we produce is going. But like what the customers really want on the other side is they want them coming from a stable supply base. So they want pretty much the same supply all year round. It's important we have enough lamb to fulfill those orders, because if they have to switch elsewhere to look for supply at certain times of the year, they're very hard to get back. So we need a consistency in supply across the year as much as we can to sort of keep those customers happy. We are probably dealing with probably the biggest and most influential customers in Europe, and we just need to maintain that to give full value back to the sector.
Not to give an opportunity there for an open door for somebody else to come into it.
Well, exactly. And if you compare our prices then to like the Southern Hemisphere prices, we're very strong. So you don't want to be giving them any excuse or any reasoning, to look or even consider those sort of cheaper alternatives.
James, just when you mentioned with the Southern Hemisphere, how big an impact has that had? Was it maybe as much as we thought it would, or what's the kind of prospects going forward?
There has been growth in the volume of sheep. New Zealand lamb coming into Europe, and then Australian lamb coming into the UK off the back of one of their trade deals there. So while we're still below sort of the quota levels we would have seen, or the levels of input we would have seen a few years ago, we're definitely starting to increase that wee bit more. Like if I'm looking back at the average prices there, like our average reported price is somewhere in around 760 at the minute. If I look at Australia, theirs is $4.90 and New Zealand is $4.40 a kilo. So even when you put in the transport costs, they're still an attractive option, or the EU is an attractive option for them. Now we've probably been lucky in a way that the US market has been so strong for these markets, and China, while given a lower price, continues to take good volumes of lamb off the world market. So they've sort of had markets closer to home. They're in their quiet season at the minute in terms of their production, and the price differential has narrowed. But even at that, it was nearly as wide as $3.50 a kilo at some stage of last year. So it's just all sort of keeping that balance. We want to have access to the EU markets and want to keep them out as much as possible.
So we're keeping them. James, look, really appreciate you coming on for that update today. Thanks very much.
No worries, all here.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Seamus again for coming on and giving us that market update. Some very useful insights in terms of where numbers are going and what the trade looks like for the coming months. That's it for me for this episode. For updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.